We're going to begin once again with the land acknowledgement. For this topic, this is particularly relevant and important as psychedelics have been used by indigenous communities for thousands of years in the Americas. And we're going to hear a lot more about this today. And it's interesting to note that in comparison to the models that we've mostly been discussing here, Measure 109, Psilocybin Services Act, a regulated, professionalized, transactional model, the indigenous communities that use psychedelics have found ways of responsibly managing them in an intergenerational way, seemingly without involving quite so many laws and regulations and red tape. What they do have is very, very strong networks of trust between each others, between families, between tribes and nations. They have strong, healthy cultural norms. And because they have this strength of community and because they have intergenerational wisdom and tradition, they've managed to responsibly manage very powerful tools without resorting to quite so much in the way of regulation and quite so much in the way of having to exchange lots and lots of money at every step in what we might call a value chain. And it's something very interesting to think about, that if you have strong community, if you have a strong network of trust, if you have an intergenerational community, that in and of itself allows you to manage things safely and responsibly without having to resort to transaction, rulemaking, enforcement, et cetera, to which a more materialistic, a less connected, and a less mature society may ultimately need to take refuge in for its own safety. So bearing that in mind as we listen to the talks today, we acknowledge that the land where we are located here rests on the traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and bands of the Chinook, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. And as I'm very much a visitor here myself, please accept my apologies if I did not correctly pronounce all of the names. We also acknowledge the systemic policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that continue to impact indigenous and Native American families today. We are a guest on these lands, and we respect and support the work of indigenous and Native leaders and their families. I would like to thank the Portland Indian Leaders Roundtable of 2018 and the Plant Medicine Healing Alliance for the language in the above three paragraphs that we've adapted. Notwithstanding the foregoing, we are very grateful to be here at the Portland Art Museum, the oldest art museum in the Pacific Northwest, founded in late 1892 with the goal of creating a first-class art museum that would be accessible to all citizens. The Portland Art Museum celebrated its centennial in 1992, which was marked by the purchase of an adjacent Masonic temple, now known as the Mark Building, which is where we're holding our conference. Now with a collection consisting of 42,000 objects, the Portland Art Museum is one of the leading cultural institutions of the Pacific Northwest. And just want to remind everyone that with your conference badge, you're able to peruse the art museum at your leisure, perhaps during lunch after discovering my necktie and visiting the Poblano Pepper food truck, which are a result of this vintage car show. I think the location of the food truck has been shifted a little bit. When Marcello gets here, we will update everyone before we break for lunch on where to find the food truck and perhaps my necktie. But that is why we're in an art museum where all of the art seems to be somewhere else. It is because it is in the main building across from the plaza, which we hope everyone takes a minute to spin through and enjoy. About Horizons, our mission is to help the public understand the world of psychedelics, and the words public and world are carefully chosen. And each day here has had a theme. On Thursday, we talked about business, organization building, the ecosystem, and economics. On Friday, we looked at controlled scientific and medical research. On Saturday, we talked about politics, activism, the law, Measure 109. Today, we're talking about psychedelics in the world. We held the first one of these conferences in 2007 in New York City, where we've continued to hold an annual conference for the last 16 years, with the notable exception of 2020. But Horizons New York is the largest and longest running annual conference devoted to psychedelics in the world, and Horizons Northwest is the first conference we've ever held outside of New York City. And we're deeply honored to be welcomed in Portland, and we hope that we can humbly serve the communities of not only Oregon, but Washington, British Columbia, and however many of you California people flew up to hang out. It's also, funny to reflect here that when we started Horizons, it was a single afternoon program just to see if it would work, and would people show up, and would DEA agents, storm the stage, and the latter part didn't happen, although plenty of people did show up, and maybe some of them were DEA agents and they learned something. We never found out. But when I was looking for a venue to hold the first Horizons, I did want it to be somewhere that felt like it was a part of the world and had dignity. I didn't want it to be in, a loft space or an alternative kind of, art sort of venue. I wanted it to feel like the topic we were discussing was worthy of honor and consideration. And a friend of mine told me because I was looking for places, what can we afford? We didn't really have a budget the first year. We just needed somewhere nice to have a meeting for an afternoon. I thought surely somewhere is out there that must be secretly sympathetic and will help us. And someone told me, I just went to this amazing church downtown where they hosted the anarchist book fair. And I went, well, my ideas are, at least marginally less dangerous than that. If they'll host the anarchist book fair, they'll probably do this thing about psychedelics. So I went to Judson Memorial Church on Washington Square Park, where I didn't really know anyone. I met with their programming director, who regaled me with the history of Judson Memorial Church and how they ran a health clinic for immigrants, how they hosted Yoko Ono and Twyla Tharp's performance art happening in the 1970s, and how it was totally true that they had just a few weeks ago hosted the anarchist book fair, and there was still a bunch of books left over if I wanted to help myself to any of them. And that's where we held the first Horizons in a church. And the second year, because the DEA did not ultimately raid the first ever Horizons, and it went pretty well, we wanted to expand to the weekend. But because it was in a church, we obviously could not start on Sunday morning. So the first Horizon Sunday, and for many years following, were actually half days, which were of great benefit to the Saturday night parties, of course, that we couldn't even do doers until noon on Sunday. But it's, again, great to be here. Look at this. I have a control bar but no test bar. It looks like I'm good to go for today. It's just wonderful to be here in such a noble and dignified venue with considerably better tech than we had the first year at Horizons. And I want to thank everyone back there at the AV booth, all of our new friends. It's been so good to feel supported in this way, and although we may hear a lot about professionalization perhaps not being the only model for psychedelics today, as far as organizing a conference goes, we're going to stick with that. So today we're going to talk about psychedelics in the real world and in the wild, which are the ways in which most of you have probably actually experienced them. The Psilocybin Services Act, which we've been discussing pretty nonstop for the last few days, it's a new model, and it's designed to support a professional, transactional approach to psychedelic experiences, as we heard a lot about yesterday, not necessarily medical or clinical, but it is an approach where a service provider treats you as a client. You will likely exchange money for that privilege and become a customer to them. But for tens of millions of living Americans, and according to the latest NIDA survey's interpretation, perhaps as many as 30 million Americans, which is just under 10% of the general population, have used what the government, showing its age a little bit, refers to as a hallucinogen. Statistically speaking, almost none of these people have used psychedelics in a controlled clinical study or even from an unregulated psychedelic-assisted therapy provider. And today, we're going to hear more about that, how psychedelics have been used by indigenous and traditional cultures. And I do often like to remind people the largest psychedelic society in the world is not actually MAPS. It is the Native American Church, which has hundreds of thousands of members who have quietly and with dignity gone about their practice for generations upon generations, and again have found non-transactional, non-professionalized ways of very safely and responsibly managing these things. We are also going to hear about religious communities and the view of psychedelics as a sacrament and a part of a religious community and a religious experience outside the context of their traditional indigenous cultures. And finally, we are certainly also going to hear about how many of you and to our benefactor, David Bronner, have been using psychedelics at festivals and concerts, nightclubs, dorm rooms, living rooms, perhaps a warehouse space on Yamhill Avenue in Portland, Oregon. So as we continue to support and hear more and more about year upon year psychedelic research, medical access to psychedelics, as we all work together to figure out Measure 109 and a different kind of regulated model of access to psychedelics, we also really need to honor the importance of Measure 110, the decriminalization, which ultimately protects far greater numbers of users of psychedelics than a regulated transactional approach will. And also what we're going to hear about today, the laws, judicial decisions, and activism pathways that can support religious and traditional communities in their use of psychedelics. So it's my hope that if the next generation of psychedelic activism and stewardship can fulfill its purpose and we can work together, we will get to enjoy a future with safe, regular and regulated, and meaningful access to psychedelics with considerably less paperwork, hopefully considerably less money, particularly for those who don't have quite so much of that to start with. And I say that as someone who, some of my best friends are psychiatrists. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce our host and moderator for the day, co-founder of the Fireside Project, Hanifa Neo Washington. Thank you, Hanifa. Yes, I'm removing my COVID test from the podium.
Thank you, Kevin. All right. Good morning, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be able to be rocking it with all of y'all today. I'll be here all day, as they say. I'm really excited to be able to welcome our first speaker for the day. And just a quick reminder that your questions matter, so please use the Slido app as questions come up, and we'd love to get them in the mix today. And before I jump in, I just want to take a moment and allow us just to take a breath together. You know, we've been steaming through this amazing conference, many of us arriving at different points in our energy this morning. So just, if it feels good to you, you can put your feet squarely on the ground. You can drop your shoulders away from your ears. Maybe you want to bring a hand to your heart. Gently close the eyes and, in your own pace, just take a deep breath in through the nose and out the mouth. Knowing that this breath is what connects us here. Thank you for that.